Our last presenter this morning is Nicola Carboni, who's an assistant professor at the I School of the University of Illinois. He works at the intersection of knowledge representation and data analysis, using computational methods for modeling, integrating, and interpreting historical and cultural data. His current work focuses on spatio-temporal analysis of exhibitions information and on the investigation of temporal variables in literary sources. He previously worked on image globalization, on the semantic exploration of iconographical patterns, and on data-driven analysis of Burckhardt's epistolary corpus. Before joining the University of Illinois, he held position as postdoctoral researcher in the digital humanities at the University of Geneva, digital humanities fellow at the Harvard Center for Italian Renaissance Studies, and Marie Curie fellow at the National Research Center of France. And today, he'll be speaking on Visual Contagions, integrating computational historical methods for investigating image circulations.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the organization. For the time, I'm the last one before lunch. I will try to be brief, but please shout at me if I'm going over time. So first of all, this work that I'm presenting here is a work that I've done during my postdoc, the work about visual contagion. And I would like to talk about how we actually deal with images in historical context, specifically how we manage to use digital tools to track image in illustrated press. So Visual Contagion is, first of all, a project by the National Science Foundation, but also a team, which is captained by Beatrice Oyer-Prunel here, and yes, some postdoc, and Robin Champenoise, that is the major engineer on the project, and a team that I share office with until a few weeks ago. So what is the idea behind this project? It's actually to study image circulation in the illustrated press between 1890 to 1990. Why illustrated press? Because during this period, it was very much a driving force of the visual. It was very good in illustrating ideas, but also spreading ideas and movement across the world. And we wanted to try to find a global approach to this phenomenon, trying to actually study the circulation not only in one specific region, not only in one specific journal, but really with as much source as we can. So a very much distant reading approach. But if it may seem easy for a few pictures, if we take into account our corpus, it becomes extremely challenging and complicated because you're going to have to deal with the problem of scale. We are going to see it very soon. So how did we approach the problem? So at the very beginning, we need to define three major components if we want to solve this. One, of course, is the problem of research. We are driving a research agenda, and thanks to this research agenda, we select, we mine our data, and then we actually reshape in order to afford certain type of algorithm or certain type of application. So if we have to start describing this, I will start maybe first with the data, and then we arrive to the direction afterward. So to study circulation at scale, the very first thing we want to find is a large collection of periodicals. Better, we can find even a large collection of periodicals with metadata. And thankfully, in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of improvement in digitized material. And a lot of this digitized material are actually available in IIIF, which Rob talked about it yesterday, and is pretty much a key to this project. So thanks to the institution that actually made available the data in IIIF, we were able to connect with them, and we were able to reuse and ingest for processing purpose these images. So unfortunately, not everything is in IIIF. We have a lot of material that is actually simply in PDF, or a lot of cover, for example, that are just plainly images. So in that case, because we really wanted to focus on IIIF, we're actually taking all these PDFs and transforming them internally in IIIF resource through a ReadyF pipeline. The result is a pretty large corpus, which practically cover institutions that have material only from one state. So for example, Polona up there only have Polish material. There are more somehow related projects, for example, the University of Bonn Translatio project, which has Arabic periodical and Turkish Ottoman periodical. There are also some other sources that are more related to art history, for example, or to a specific field. And there are others that are related to a single project or a single movement. For example, the Blue Mountain Project, which is only focused on documenting avant-garde. Now, for all of this periodic we collect, we had to retrieve and normalize their metadata. So how we do that? We can do to IIIF whenever they are available, but not everything, again, as metadata in IIIF. So what other method do we have? Sometimes when we are lucky, we have API or SparkQL. Some other time, we don't have anything. Some other time, we need to scrap the page and retrieve this information. Some other time, the page, there is nothing. And then we need to actually go issue by issue and define for some metadata for all of them, which can be quite challenging and very time-consuming, specifically if you think about things that are not really in a Latin alphabet. Or some other, we had an example where the calendar was not our calendar, but that's making it even more difficult. But for all of them, what we actually describe is mainly 4 things. For each issue, okay, what is the name of the journal, which again, it may not be in a Latin version or in the original version, when it was published, and where it was published. And then we add on top of that an internal vocabulary term, which is a journal type. So somehow that describes the domain of the journal. Are we talking about news? There is a journal about art history, there's a journal about avant-garde, there's a journal about architectural history, and so on and so forth. And this is just done manually. We couldn't find any way to do this automatically. And of course, all of this need to be normalized, because as we have things in different languages, as we have things very much spread with different date format, all of this need to be done, need to be normalized in one single date format, and of course, that can be done through Python, but also more problematic is the place. We do that through relying on Wikidata, which allow us not only to normalize the place using practically one authority, but also to extend the data, retrieving, for example, the coordinate, which is pretty good for analytical purpose. So, so just to recap, we select the data. We use several types of script that depends on the source we are actually using. So we will have a script for the BNF, we will have a script for archive.org, but we can have a script for example, a very small website which has 3 publications, which again, time-consuming. But all of them, it can be taken with a script, transform in IIIF, and then all the manifest link in IIIF are going to be stored in a separate file with all the metadata. And thanks to that, we collected almost 20,000 different periodicals that are being published in more than 1,200 cities, covering around 50 countries. Now, what we do with that? What kind of tools do we employ to study such a corpus? Well, we can use data science, network analysis, but before all of them, we pass to use computer vision, because the very first thing that we do is actually scan all of them and extract the image. For doing that, we use a doc extractor. We mentioned Mathieu Brie, just on a talk before, is again here. And so it's actually a great algorithm that is specifically made for historical sources and allow us to extract images from mostly printed publication, but also in written one. So for each of those images that we extract, what we are actually extracting is the URL for each image, because we are using IIIF. So we know how to retrieve an image. We have a unique URL for each of them that can also retrieve the context of the image. We are going to see it before, just after. And so using this method, we created a large corpus of images. How large? I'm talking more than 15 million images. And so if we want to deal with 15 million images, we want to study circulation, the very first thing we need to do is try to understand the similarity in between the images in order to understand when an image circulates. To do that, initially we thought to use an algorithm that is called ArtMiner, which allows for each image to find the exact pair. The problem is that when we are dealing with 3 million images, this algorithm is extremely slow, not even 15. And the other problem is that we are dealing with a lot of image we have variation. Variation in terms of digitization practice and digitization tool. We can see it here, but again, we also saw just before that an image can be slightly retouched. So what is exactly the same image is a bit more complicated. So following that up, we start to use ResNet 18, which is a convolutional network, a CNN based on ImageNet. But the results were promising, but still were not great. Why not great? Because apparently it was very good in finding similarity based on the subject, based on the semantic content, but not really on the visuality itself. So, for example, if we find like pictures that are similar because they have a person in it, but we are more interested, for example, in the position of how the pose is put. So was not giving us the greatest result. We switched to another algorithm, which we stick to it from the rest of the project, which is called VIT. It's a vision transformer, and in this case, using Dino, which is a self-supervising technique. So just to give you a brief idea of what VIT is practically, with respect to CNN, it does divide the image in batches, and then it processes through a process that is called self-attention, which are the part of the image that are more connected with the other. Somehow, the part that can be understood only in relation to the other. And through that, it defines some part of the image that are more relevant, and then you use this for comparison across other images. VIT is also the great, it's very robust, first of all. We use VIT S16, allow us to compute a lot of images very fast. Of course, with the limitation that you are actually dealing with 15 million images and you have a workstation, but not like the infrastructure of OpenAI, but it worked very well for us. And a good part of it is also that is not that sensible to contrast variation. So it allows us to actually retrieve images that are maybe dissimilar in terms of light and contrast, but they actually have the same visual content in it. I'm not an expert on computer vision. I understand how does it work and I use it, but Robin Champenoise is, and if you want more detail, they are definitely written in this paper. Unfortunately, only in French, but you know, that's Google Translate or DeepL actually work better. So what we put together here is a very somehow streamlined process that starts from IIIF. You allow to collect metadata and connect this metadata with the image that then are actually computed in order to define similarity and cluster together in order to be able to visualize them. But the problem, this is very computer science oriented thing. And we come from a field that is art history, and a lot of art historians don't want to take a Python algorithm and implement it. And ourselves too, we want to actually study the image, not just define a process for it. So we actually built up what is a platform to explore this image, which is called Explore, which is open accessible to everyone at this address. And to increase the usability of this whole process, Explore just automatically takes in input the metadata list and the list of images and does everything else. So now, just to give you a bit of a preview, this is how does it appear. You don't need a username to access this. This is an open access data set that you can actually explore. The platform allows you to see all the clusters that you retrieve based on a specific type of criteria that you can set. For example, how much international is the cluster, etc. And as we have the IIIF link, we can actually go directly to the image. And not only we can go directly to the full image using IIIF, we can go to the context of the image, which is very important to us. Where does it appear? In which page? What's the text around it? We can retrieve all of that using IIIF. And of course, using this, we can explore practically all the clusters that have been produced in 15 million and more. But we can also do a little bit more in this case if we have a user account. And which is free to do. We just need to register. In this case, with a user account, you can create collection. which has been revolutionary to us in some way, because we are not being driven only by a machine, but with collection is actually the user that can define, can explore the collection, but explore the corpus and define his own collection that he wants to study, that he wants to explore more, that he wants to extract. We can create simply a collection. We can assign some owner to this collection, so some people want to collaborate with it. But not only the owner, we can define this collection as public or private. If we have a private collection, probably a reader, someone that we want to, for example, in our case, student, that they want to work on it, but we don't really trust to not destroy everything, there will be a reader. And based on that, so we have a different level of access, we can explore the cluster, and we can start to add image to this collection. We have two ways of adding the image. Well, first and foremost, what we want is try to understand what the clustering that the machine does. And maybe we are interested in one of those clusters. As you see now with the user, we can see that we have some collection that we have access to, and we can assign a cluster to one of the collection by clicking simply in one of those tags that are around. So very, very easy going, and we can just remove it in case, of course, we made a mistake. But this is one way of doing. I say that there is another one. On one side, we have the cluster created by the machine, but sometimes we want to search our own images. Image that we find in the corpus and want to find an image similar to that one, or image that we have in our computer and we want to find something similar in the corpus. That's both possible. We just click on this similarity search, we select an image, we can find me something similar, and the algorithm already find us things that are similar to that image. Rank them by similarity, of course, in this case. And if we are interested in some of that, for example, if we are doing some work on one artist, we want to find all the, we are working on a specific work of art, and we want to see how many instances of that specific image are in our corpus, we can use this function. And then we can select the one that we consider correct, because the computer is a lot of time not right. So we want to select them, and we want to put in our own collection. And these are distinguished from the one the computer create. The one computer create are clustered. These are image series. This is one way of, there is another way of exploring these images and this cluster and this collection to a function that we call cluster serve. By going to a cluster and selecting a specific one or a specific collection, here somehow the video is going very slow to it, but what we can do is actually start to analyzing using the underlying data of the images. So for example, if we choose this cluster, and we can just click on cluster serve, and then we find where the image has been published. We have all the, as I mentioned before, we have the coordinate, extremely useful in this case. We also have the temporal frame that we are considering, that when they were published, we can filter it, and we can see also in this gray part how the image contrasts with the rest of the corpus. So how many images we have in the corpus for that specific year versus the one that we have. Okay, as you may probably notice, this is a lot of things. So there's a lot of data, there's a lot of data collection, so what we do with it. Just to give you some idea, because the research directions are pretty large when we are dealing with 15 million images and such a large temporal frame. I'm just going to give you an example of two different projects or research that we did, starting from one about the actual mediatization of the early automobile in the 20th century. So for the one that are not familiar with history of the automobile, before the introduction of car, the urban setting was extremely different. It was a mixed environment where on the street there were people, there were bike, and there were tram, and there were no specific rule of who can stay in the street. Those are being introduced only after the introduction of cars. And they've been introduced for certain reason. The reason is that when you have this mixed environment and introduce cars, which are going very fast, tragedy happens. And tragedies start to happen a lot. So much as there were enormous protests, and not only protests against car, a lot of protests against driver. don't want to go into gory detail, but throwing stone at a car was not very uncommon. Slashing tire was very much of a practice in New York. They were putting ropes across the street in order to block the car. The police in Germany, actually, there was a law in Germany in 1909 that advised to take a gun in your car and also allow you to flee the scene in case of accident, because if not, you will be lynched. So I'm talking about really, really rage, because of course who were in the street? Children. And so the problem became quite strong. So we know from a lot of written source about what happened, fighting traffic by Norton. There is a motordom. There's a lot of motordom literature focused about this period, but they're all written source that talk about protests, that talk about article journal. So I wanted to see, actually, and I wanted to understand how much of the visual discourse we have about this particular phenomenon. Were images used in the activist discourse, or were they not? And fortunately, we have an enormous corpus. I actually, based on that, I extract around more than 5,000 images of car. And I start to look at them. I start to categorize them and assigning keyword. And based on that, I start to look actually when and what image of incident, accident of car were present. And by looking at it, I was a bit surprised at the very beginning, because there was very little. A lot of images of cars you may see are positive. A lot of images of car are advertisement, of course, but there is very little negative attention to the car. The context exists, but is mostly focused on satirical journals. Satirical journals do publish this kind of photo exactly about the incident that people somehow slashed in half and complaining about the driver. So we can see a lot of that, but in very little number. Based on more than 5,000 images, we found only 50 instances where this happened, which start to raise the question why. And so I went to look at another project. I went to look at Chronicle America, which was mentioned also before. For the one that don't know, is quite representative of the US situation, as we have a newspaper for each county in US that has been digitized, and we took all of it and we start to analyze all of it. And also by analyzing all of it, we find very little images of cars in a negative manner, very little images of incident. Now, I do not have the time to dive into it so much. It's extremely interesting, but this was due to a series of reasons. Some of that are more connected with the technology behind actually the publication process in the period, and how much would it take to create an image that was somehow covering current event. Other are more connected with the mixing between journalists and motorists in the very early moment. There were a lot of commissioning between the two industry. And so there is a series of reasons that allows to think why it didn't happen. But it's still quite shocking to me that on one side we have a lot of written report. On the other side, we have very little images about it. Just to give an example of another project, in this we went like very far, very different from art history. We are coming back to art history, and another things that we work on is avant-garde. Beatrice Prunel, she's an expert in avant-garde, and with her we actually select a bibliography of avant-garde journal, and we extract out of the corpus 98 periodical and more than 11,000 images. And based on that, we actually start to study this on 3 major indexes. So the one of centrality, we are looking at avant-garde journal, and what we are interested in is which journal publish more images that get taken by and republished by other journals in the community. Or another, the hybridity. We say that we have the domain of each journal, so which journal publish images that get actually then republished in images that are not from avant-garde, but they are coming from other domain. And then, of course, the one of internationality. So which journal publish images that get retaken and published more internationally? by looking at them, by looking at these three indexes, what we did was organizing all the images into what we call chains of circulation. Define for each images where it originates and where it gets republished afterwards. And based on that, we practically can create some visual trajectory. Then based on one image, we can see that it was initially published, in this case, in Rome, that it passed on another city, then it crossed the Atlantic, and then come back to Europe. And this, and on this, when we start to study it, we first of all start to challenge the centrality of Paris for the avant-garde, because a lot have been published a lot have been published that circulate outside of Paris, specifically in East Europe. We have a lot that's been published in Berlin, be published in Warsaw, be published in Prague, and if we are looking at this, at a map of how this spread, we see actually that the major interconnection are in East Europe and not in Paris. However, Paris has this role. Why? So we are looking at the internationality index, and we see, for example, the red one is France, how each country is connected with and the publication done in a country are connected with the other country. So how image spread from one country to another. And based on that, and by looking at this index, we actually realize that Paris is not a creation center, but it's a distribution center. Everything arrives in Paris, gets redistributed, and it doesn't circulate so much internationally before Paris, but only after Paris. And we also find out like some specific peculiarities. We also find out that Germany and France communicate a lot more than was thought of, but also, for example, image published in Netherlands will have to be published in Belgium before being published in France. Somehow is this physical passage that we have also on that. So we have extensively published on this. This is just two of the reference that we have on the topic that I live in there. But the project has also developed other studies. For example, in this case, when the idea of old master took place, when they actually become so much relevant, because at a certain point they were not, and is more connected with the rise of nationalism in Europe. But that's, again, other paper. What we use it is not only, this project not only has been used for somehow research purpose, but we also partner with the University of San Marino, and in order to leave the student the possibility to create using this data, to create something different, and to try to experiment with visualization. And one of these nice projects is Anna Di Franco, that's Space Time of Corset, where based on research that is done by one of our PhD students, Marie Barras, which studied fashion, they actually look at how the idea of corset was before promoted as a health device, before becoming fashion, and how this corset evolved over time, also in terms of forms. And I don't know if I can go further with the video to show you, because the last part is great. If not, I will let it run for a moment. But she made an incredible, nice visualization of how the format of the shape of the corset change over time. And then she put them all together in order to recreate in one single image all the possible shape of a corset that we have. But I can try to move, but I don't think. Yeah. No, apparently I'm not able to move further with the video. Well, in any case, if you go to this website here, actually you're gonna find all the information. This one is another project for another student, which is Mario Falasca, which start to look at another things connected with fashion, with a pattern. How do you study a pattern? You study the animalier. And he wanted to study the leopard pattern, and how it was used, and it was incredibly used. Is actually in the photo in the corpus, and he wanted to study how, or he wanted to visualize, try to find a way to check how we can see it in relation to images of tiger or of leopard. Are these two things connected, and how can show it in the data? So he created a 3D space where he project the image using in time, using part of this 3D space to actually define, for example, in here, if it's coming from a pattern from what they call an alive versus dead animal, so a photo of a fashion versus a photo of the animal. And so on and so forth. There's been many other. We have made exhibition, notably the one in Jeu du Pomme, but also a digital exhibition in Europeana, the image that shape Europe, so which are the image that circulate the most in Europe. One of them is advertisement, of course, but fantastic image of advertisement. So just to conclude, as you saw, this project has been quite large. Not only has been quite large, it encompassed so many things. And what I wanted to showcase here with this very different research direction that, in a way or another, going and using AI is not just a way to do a distant reading of a source. It's not just a way to take something to make and to have like this shallow, I will call it shallow, I'm sorry, it's not that shallow, look on it. But it allows us to go a bit deeper. It allows us to come back to the archive, to come back to the close reading of the source. Because once it helps us define new avenue, but also it helps us then ask new questions. And when we have this new question, we need to come back to look at them. We need to have a more historical approach. So in this case, somehow the digital is a driving force that allow us to take something that we already know, that was established, for example, the exchange between France and Germany, and they were not considered we're not talking too much, and then we discovered that this happened. We can come back to the source, we can find new material, we can take a new look into the archive. So AI in this case help us digital in this case help us incredibly to have a new look, to have a new question, to open new avenue for research. And that's it for my side. I hope I've been on time, and thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you, Nicola. Wonderful presentation. The floor is open for questions. We've got about 15 minutes.
Oops, thanks. Thank you. This is very interesting. Would it be possible to search your website knowing that a number of artists who have made collages, would you be able to search your website and locate some of those, say in the 30s, Lagarde or,
Yes and no. In the sense, I sincerely didn't try. One thing like that we discover is that somehow this algorithm, I will not call it magic, but it's very good in finding similar. We cannot find, in this case, things by simply searching for collage, because we do not categorize anything. We just search through visuality. So if you have one example of something, you can retrieve examples that are similar to that something. So if you have one picture that you have in mind, you can drop it in, and we can test it actually together, and we can see what is able to find. But it's not based on word. It's never based on word. We do not index any word, but only images. So if there is one or multiple, I forgot to mention, but of course we can use one image, but of course we can use also 20 images and say, find me things that are similar to this 20 images. So if we have more examples of collage, then it's going to be able to find things that are similar in our corpus. The problem is, again, and this ontological question, what is similarity? I mean, what we are trying to find here. I can try to find something that are similar in technique, or are trying to find exactly the same picture. So it depends very much on what we are searching for. But just saying collage, no, we don't have that.
So it has a limited capacity to do that, but yeah. So you might strike it lucky, or you may not.
Yeah, it's done on purpose somehow. We didn't want to. There is a lot of problem with using Word, in the sense there's a lot of critique of having a logocentric approach to the study of images. So we say, okay, let's just use images. What we want to find is visuality. Let's just go through that.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask you a question just about the power of scale, right? Because, I mean, one of the things that, of course, is so impressive is just the scale of this project, the number of samples, of journals, of images, et cetera. But what I'm really struck by is the distance between the two examples that you showed, right? One of which absolutely disproves the starting assumption, and the others of which seem to reinforce it. Yeah. And there's like a real persuasive power to searching an archive like this. And I'm wondering how you contour the kind of the reliability of the returns in these kinds of projects?
That's a good question. So It's a question that I asked myself when I was looking at cars, for example. And or another one was when we were looking at the Impressionist landscape. Are we not looking, is the machine broken? Are we not able to find it because of the algorithm or because there are lack of source? So in this case, in the case of car, I mean, somehow the idea was like, okay, let's compare source. Let's compare something that is very representative, that we know is there for a while, and let's see if these images are actually present or not. So one is by comparison. The other is by asking other questions. So for example, landscape of Impressionism, we start to look into it and say, we couldn't find so much. Why they are choosing images that, you know, we know that it was making, but they were already publishing other type of images of the same artist, which are not landscape. Is the algorithm not able to find it? Okay, that's one possibility. Let's take a look at the technical limitation. And then we discover somehow that in the actual reproduction of image in the press, this was not favored because it was more complex. And that's why I say it pushes us really to find the socio-technical problems connected to that. So somehow we try to see things through different algorithms. One was ResNet, now is VIT, but the other is probably push us to verify through other method and other source, which in my perspective is good in the sense that at the end that's what art historians want to do more than have answer.
So, I mean, in a lot of ways, the visuals become a kind of associative mechanism, but it's really important, I guess, to drill down into those URLs and the context of the journals themselves, and not just, you know, work at the level of the visual associations.
And that's, if I may add, is both a great thing and a curse, in the sense that we want to find the context, but we are actually relying for a lot of source to external partner. Now, the BNF at a certain point banned us because we were taking so much stuff and making too much requests. And then so I say, well, okay, but so we got in touch, and because of us, they actually put a limit on the API. I mean, we were responsible for doing some limitation and define a method of authentication in the API, and we are sorry for it. But some other source just simply died. And then, you know, you have link rot, you cannot find the original context. But should we actually take them ourselves? That poses a bit of a challenge, both in technical and conceptual terms. So one is, do we want to host everything? And the other is, should we also? It's another big question. But the other is like, if we leave the source outside to other people, they may change the URL. Archive.org was a great example. They changed completely the way to access pictorIA at a certain point, and those sources were not being, we were not being able to showcase them, to show them. So we were still able to process because we had a backup for processing, but not to show to the art historian the context where things were published. Sometimes, you know, in this case, we host certain things that are in PDF, but we tend to rely on external partner. But, you know, IIIF link, for as much as they are reliable, they break. And if they break, should we break a project? But also another question, a project end. What happens if we host the data? That's some other big issue.
Great. We do have time for other questions.
Thank you for your talk. I had a question with regards to clustering. Is there a capacity to, instead of focusing on individual images, but to rather shift the focus to looking at photojournalism or specific narratives or photo essays in a way to track and examine press archives, for example?
So it depends. What I will do. There are two ways of doing it that I will approach, given the limitation of the platform. Because one answer is no, in the sense not simply by saying to the platform, just look at this thing. At least we never implement a way to say, just look at this category of things. So what you can do is generally create your own corpus, or a sub-corpus with a specific that you tag in some way and say, this is all photojournalism. Just process this. I have all the clustering for this. Just do only work on a sub-corpus. And that's one way of putting it. The other one is actually process everything. What we do is extract then after and do all the processing afterward using data science method or whatever, and just focus on certain type of image that have a tag, photojournalism, for example. And that would be another way. The first one is simpler, but that would be another way of looking at it.
All right. If there are no final questions, then please join me in thanking Nicola Carboni.